Well, today let's talk about what it means to be together. What it means to be together. There was a Peanuts cartoon, and Lucy walks in and demands that Linus change the channel on the TV that he's watching. So he asks, well, what makes you think you can walk right in here and take over? Lucy says, these 5 things right here. Individually, they're nothing. But when I curl them together into a fist, they form a weapon that is terrible to behold. What channel do you want? asked Linus, and flipped the TV. And then on the way off, he looks at his fingers and says, well, why can't you guys get organized like that? You know, scores of men drafted into military service, they find for the first time in their lives, and it's under the pressure of combat often, the power of joining together with those whose lives are bound up with theirs. Now here's an illustration from the great General Colin Powell. He said this: Sam Donaldson was interviewing a young soldier in a tank platoon on the eve of the Battle of Desert Storm. So he asked, how do you think the battle will go? Are you afraid? The GI responded, well, we'll do okay. We're well trained and I'm not afraid. And then he gestured towards his buddies. He gestured towards the rest of his platoon and he says, I'm not afraid because I'm with my family. The other soldiers shouted, tell him again. He didn't hear you. He said, this is my family, and we're going to take care of each other. Now, in that very same war, however, you probably know that the following is true. Those troops went into the Kuwaiti deserts to take on the Iraqi forces that had taken Kuwait, right? Now, in 2 months' time, our forces cleaned house and returned Kuwait to its leadership. But did you know that most of our troops that were injured there were not injured by Iraqi forces at all? Most of our injuries and casualties that occurred in Desert Storm were a result of what is called friendly fire. Friendly fire is when you're hit by your own troops. In other words, it's where your own soldiers, your own brothers, your own family are your worst enemy. Now, you can't prepare for it. Why? Because you can't see it coming. Right? You can't prepare for it. Now, globally speaking, the Church Catholic with the small c, the universal church, if you'll bear with me, you think maybe the biggest enemies aren't from the outside within the church, but they're from within? Like the weapons that are used, obviously they're not rifles or missiles or whatever, but it's attitudes and it's words and things like that. But many church members are seriously wounded within their own church families in friendly fire incidents, aren't they? And many outsiders, for lack of a better phrase, I tried to come up with a better word, and there's just, I don't know, what do you say that's not offensive? But folks outside the church who are looking to us to see if we're the change that the world is waiting for, they're looking at us and saying, I don't want to go there. I'll be landing right in the middle of a war zone. How many friendly fire casualties are there here? You ever been a casualty of a friendly fire incident? How many times have you been a victim of friendly fire? More importantly, how many times have you ever attacked a fellow brother or sister in a friendly fire incident? Sometimes it happens and we don't even know we did it, doesn't it? That happens to me a lot. I grew up in a family where we tease one another because we love one another. But there are times when, me being the knucklehead that I am, I don't realize that I've gone too far, and I'll tease someone and I'll hurt their feelings. And I have just been or produced a casualty to friendly fire by my words. It's like the man who was stranded alone on a desert island. They finally found him and they came to rescue him, and there he was, with his volleyball and everything. And they started taking him off the island, and he had 3 buildings built. So, well, you're here by yourself. You got 3 buildings. He goes, oh, yeah. Well, that's my house. This one is my church. And that one's the church where I used to go before they hurt my feelings. Right? Here's the statement we've said several times over the last few weeks, but I'm going to say it again. The Spirit of God given free rein dwells and operates in Christians. He dwells and operates in us. And then we, mature Christians, those mature Christians form what? They form healthy churches. They form healthy churches. The seed that we pray will grow to become the mighty sequoia is a healthy church, right? So we're going to go back to Acts 2 again, and we're going to read our verses. We're working our way through our text over a series of weeks. For right now, I'm just going to read 41 through 43 because those are the verses we've actually already looked at together. It says this: "So those who accepted his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 people were added to them. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, which is to the breaking of bread and to the prayers. Then fear came over everyone, and many signs and wonders were being performed through the apostles." The first healthy church was on its way, wasn't it? What did we say was true of the first healthy church? What's the first trait that we learned in our text? It's a body that is devoted, right? It's devoted to two legs: discipleship. We're going to learn and know God better. He is sweet, and we're going to get to know the sweetness of God, and then we're going to be devoted to and stand upon our fellowship. We're going to stick together. And that devotion leads to something really awesome. We talked about this last week. When you're really, truly devoted to something, don't you find yourself kind of finding a sense of awe for that thing? That sense of devotion that we have for God will lead to a sense of awe for God. And Lord willing, when we come in to express ourselves in worship, that awe for God will emanate, and there'll be a spirit of beauty in that process. That's awe for God in action. And awe for God comes from devotion for God. But that awe will lead to something else. Let's read verse 44 and the first part of 46. So we know that fear came over everyone, signs and wonders were being performed, and then we pick up in 44 that says this: "Now all the believers were together and held all things in common." And then 46 says, every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple complex. Now wait a minute. I'm not sure I heard that right. Before I get into what I'm questioning about the language there and the possibility of it, let me say this. If you're making notes, you might want to write down that devotion leads to awe, and awe leads to celebration. When you're in awe of God, don't you look forward to celebrating him? Have we celebrated God yet here this morning, today? I think we have. I think he would smile down upon us and say, you know what, look at my beloved children in whom I am well pleased. They celebrate me today because they're in awe of me, and their awe for me came from their devotion to me. I believe that God is saying that of us this morning. At least I hope that he is. So I believe that awe will lead to celebration. So if you're making notes again, this church, this body, it's a body that assembles to celebrate. It's a body that assembles to celebrate. If you know anything about Pythagoras or any of the other great philosophers of that age, the language of this text this morning was the language that they used to describe the utopian societies, the utopian communities that they proposed to their followers, to their disciples. You ever heard that expression, utopia? What does utopia mean? Yeah, it's like this perfect community. And this is the language they would use when they describe this utopian community, this language of all the believers were together. Let's stop right there in 44. All the believers were together. Wait a minute. What's the first word? All. All. Everyone? Everyone. Everyone who believed Jesus, all Christians, not some, not those who felt like it, not those who earned it, or those who looked right, or whatever superlatives you want to use, they were all, everyone who was a Christian was together with every other person who was a Christian. That's pretty extraordinary. Now, together here, we're going to use this word together twice today, and it's not the exact same word, so we're going to pay a little bit of attention. But together here is the concept of superimposed. You know what superimposed means? What happens when you superimpose something? You sort of make it overlap, right? You place it over the top of something else. If you've ever read 1 Corinthians 7 and 5, where it talks about the physical relationship of husband and wife and they're coming together in union, the word that's used there is this word for together. The physical relationship between a husband and a wife. It means that they are superimposed. They overlap. You can't tell where one ends and the other one begins. Everyone was together in this church. Everyone met together. As Hebrews would later say, they did not forsake the assembling of themselves together. They knew the importance of coming together as a body, as a church. Now, how many of you think this probably means more than just being in the same place at the same time? Can you be in the same place at the same time with people and not be together? Every time I go to Walmart, I ain't together with them folks, I'm telling you. Those folks are crazy. Always running up on your heels with the carts and stuff, making you want to forget all about loving Jesus and do dirty things to them. They don't do that to you? You don't go there then, right? No, but can you all be together in one place and yet not be together? That's what I'm talking about. And this is critical to God's call for us, because it's saying that they would not have been together like this unless they had something in common, unless they had commonalities. It's a body where everyone is together in unity. Unity. How beautiful it is when the brothers are unified, when they're come together in unity, the text earlier in the Old Testament says. It's a body where everyone is together in what? Unity. We Christians should be all together. Now listen, if you know me, you know this is true. I don't have it all together. No, that's not what I said. We do not have it all together, right? We don't have it all together. We're broken, we're messy, and if we do this right, it's going to get more broken and more messy. But here's the thing. We are all together. None of us have it all together. We don't have it all together. What we will be all together and unified. There's no intellectual arrogance. There's no social superiority. There's no racial intolerance. There's no temperamental privileges. They were all together and they were bound into a fellowship by the same ideas. Now here's the review. What were the ideas in their fellowship that bound them together? They're going to be discipled and they're going to hold to the same practices. They're going to have the same practices in their fellowship. They're going to share the table together. They're going to be intimate with one another. And they're going to keep the same faith habits. They're going to pray together. Because guess what? When we don't have it all together and we are all together, perhaps the best thing that we can do is pray for each other because we don't have it all together. Right? All the believers were together and had everything in common. Wait a minute, everything? Everything in common? How is that possible? Is that possible? Maybe it's not the way we look at it. Maybe we're not talking about our favorite college football teams, and maybe we're not talking about our favorite flavor of ice cream, or whether we take frou-frou coffee or regular coffee. Maybe we're not talking about those kinds of things. Maybe what he's saying is that they were together in unity and they were together in common interests, right? They had everything in common. This word common is a really crazy word. It's koinos, and if you paid attention over the last couple of weeks, our word fellowship was koinonia, right? This is the root word of that word. And this word is kind of bizarre because this word actually means defiled. At times it could mean unclean. At times, at other times, it could just mean common or ordinary, or to lie common or open to all, something that everyone has access to. Common or belonging to several, so community property, or of which several are partakers. A well would be common. I kind of look at it like this. It says later in Acts 4:32 that this church was of one heart and one soul. In their core, the things that matter, the hills worth dying on, they were unified and they had those things in common. They believed the same things. They nailed down the apostles' doctrine. They had a foundation, and on those things, they were together. How many of them? Everyone. Everyone was together. It's a body where everyone is together in unity and keeps on having everything, heart and soul, in common. I'll give you an example. If I were to tell you about the light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, what would I be talking about? What would I be talking about? Would I be talking about that? You see it? What is that? That's a laser, right? Which is short for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, a laser. What's the difference between a spotlight and a laser? If you've ever been to a big production and you've seen those spotlights, they'll cook the hide right off your back. So what's the difference between the two? How can a medium-powered laser burn through steel in a matter of seconds while the most powerful spotlight in the world can only make it warm? Both have the same electrical power current. They really do. They use the same amount of electricity. What's the difference in between the two? What if I were to tell you that the difference between that spotlight and that laser is unity? It's unity. A laser differs from other light sources because it emits light coherently. What does it mean to be coherent? Simply put, it's a medium of excited molecules with mirrors at each end. Some of those excited molecules naturally decay into a less excited state. Now, y'all are glad, I didn't sign up for this Bill Nye the Science Guy stuff. I'm going to make it really simple. As these light particles decay into a less excited state, they release what's called a photon. You've heard this word before. It's where we get our word photograph or photography. And that's just a particle of light. And that particle of light is where this unique process of the laser begins. That photon moves along and it tickles other photons, right? And they begin to journey together. And then they invite two more, and then they invite two more, and they tickle one another, and they begin to move together. Before you know it, there's a whole army of photons that have joined together, and they're traveling coherently. They're traveling together, and that unity gives the laser its power. A spotlight may have just as many photons, but each is going in its own independent way. Now, they'll occasionally interfere with each other, but they're just kind of all going more independently. So much of its power is wasted and cannot be focused on much of any useful work other than just making things brighter. However, the laser, because of its unity, is like an army marching in tight formation. And it can focus all its power on its one single objective. Same amount of power exerted. One is unbelievably intense, while the other one will just make you sweat. Let's go to the next step. Every day, in verse 46, part A, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. How often? So everyone has everything in common, and they meet, wait a minute, every day? They just didn't know any better. Their life was not as busy as ours. They didn't have as many things going on. They didn't have as much trouble doing life as we do. And here's the point about that together word that I mentioned earlier. This is a different word for together. It's not the overlapping, the superimposing form of together. This one means unanimously. They were unanimously together every day. They were of one accord. They were all together constantly. They devoted to meeting together daily. Where? In the temple complex. Again, that wasn't the safest place in the world for them to be, but that's where the greatest chance of other people meeting Jesus was, so that's where they went. They weren't trying to be safe, they were trying to see the world saved. So, not only were they together every day, they were also visibly together every day. The world around them saw them and knew who they were. It could be identified, and it was unsafe. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have it all together, but we'll be in it together. And not only that, we do not have it all together, but we will always be in it together. I'm with you. You be with me all the time. It doesn't matter what circumstances. It doesn't matter what's going on in my life. If you need me, I'm here. And if I need you, you're there. We're unified. We're laser. And the power is incomprehensible. So the church, here's your take home. The church, I believe with every fiber of my being, it's a body where everyone is together and has everything in common every day. So believe me when I say, I'm not saying that we need to come here every day and meet as a church. I don't think that's what it meant at all. I think it meant they hung out together. They did life together. They shared meals together. They cared about one another. When there was a disaster, they showed up to help. each other. When things were going well, they showed up to celebrate with one another. When they were in grief, they showed up to cry together, possibly even maybe die together. Are you tracking with me? They had everything in common, and it was constant for them because that's who they were. They were a group of photons that were absolutely going to shine a spotlight of Jesus on their world and poke holes in the darkness. If you were to ask me what's the greatest identifying trait of the body of Christ, of the church as we understand it, I would say unity. Where else in the world can people who look different, smell different, act different, know different, own different, be different, everything, come together and be one? There's a reason I use the military as an example, because that's about the only other place that I could think of where it's even close to the same. But there's a different level of acceptance there too, isn't there? Who does the church accept? Everybody. Everybody. What's a disqualifying factor? There's not one. There's not one. We're not talking about leadership, and we're not talking about deacons and elders. We're just simply talking about people who can come along and do life. What's the disqualifier? Say it. There's not one. Unity is the greatest identifying factor of the body of Christ. Why? It overcomes loneliness. I've said this before and I'll say it again. You ever been lonely? I believe loneliness is probably the most destructive force in all of space and time. God designed us to be in community, and being lonely is horrific for people. It overcomes loneliness. It actually overcomes selfishness. You know anybody that has a hard time seeing others because they're kind of stuck on seeing themselves? What's the best way to get beyond that? Start doing life with other folks and realizing what you have that they don't, and vice versa. It'll overcome selfishness. There's no way to be unified if you're jealous. If we come together in unity, we'll overcome our jealousy. We have to, because otherwise you can't do it. We'll overcome our covetousness. I wish I had what he had. I wish I had what she had. You can't be unified together and have these issues. It's an acceptance that goes beyond these things. You can't be afraid. What if we all looked at each other and said, you know what, if we're in this together, let's get it. Come on, let's go. What's my expression? We'll go charge hell with a water pistol. Why? Because I know you got my back, and I know you have mine, and I trust you to do your job, and you trust me to do mine. We're in this together. It overcomes risk. It overcomes need. So I want to ask you to ask yourself, and believe me, I've asked myself this question this week as I prepared. Is that how I operate? Is that how I operate? I want you to ask yourself, is that how I operate? There were two taxidermists who were standing in front of a window where there was an owl on display. And they immediately began to criticize the way it was mounted. Its eyes were not natural. Its wings were not proportioned with its head. Its feathers were not neatly arranged. And its feet could have been improved. And just when they had finished with their criticism, guess what happened? The owl turned his head. And it blinked. You know what? It's a whole lot easier to be critical than it is to be correct. All of you at one point or another, because I've taught with most of you, a critical spirit has hurt you here. And I don't mean here, but I just mean here. And perhaps we would all, if we were honest with each other and with God, would have to say, at one point or another, my critical spirit has hurt others. Let's stop critiquing, and let's just start behaving correctly. What's the disqualifier from this body? There's not one. We're all in it together. We don't have it all together. Neither will anybody else. If we don't have it all together, why would we expect someone else to have it all together? We do not have it all together, but we will be in it together. The church is called the body of Christ. But have you ever thought about what would it be like if the members of our physical bodies behave like the members of the spiritual bodies sometimes do? What if our body behaved like the church? What if the heart said, you know what, I'm stuck in a rut. For 45 years, all I've done is beat. I'm tired of it. It's time for someone else to step up and do this job. Okay, feet, it's up to you. You pump the blood. Or the lungs said, we're so underappreciated around here. I don't think the other organs realized they couldn't do their jobs without us. If we quit doing our job for just a few minutes, everybody will finally see how valuable we really are to this place. The brain thinks he's big stuff. Let him go without some oxygen for a while. And we'll see how important he is. The liver. Why do I get all the dirty work? You think bile is fun? I've been at this for 45 years now, and do you think anyone else has ever asked me to make any decisions? You never asked me to pump any blood or to perform any functions that are noticeable outside the body? No, I just have to make bile. Sometimes I wonder why I bother. It's a good thing the body doesn't work like that, right? It's a good thing our church doesn't either, because there's no way to be unified in that. I'm going to close with this illustration. We've talked about the seed that grows into the sequoia today, and I did that intentionally because this is our last illustration, and it's going to talk about these sequoia trees of California. Have you ever seen these? Has anybody ever been to California and seen these giant sequoia trees? Do you know that they actually have a very shallow root system? How does a tree, all right, we live around here, we just had a hurricane. When you hear of a tree with a shallow root system, what's the first thing you think of? Let a wind come, it's going in the ground. It's probably going to fall on my garage and crush my motorcycle or whatever, right? So how do these enormous trees whose roots are just barely below the surface, how do they stand? Well, it's because the sequoias are very unique in their traits. They only grow in groves where their roots intertwine with one another and they interconnect with one another. And they also only grow in areas where their frame is together. So when the strong wind blows, guess what happens? They hold each other up. That's the way the church is designed to work. Let the wind blow. It will. Listen, folks, the wind's going to blow. The storm's going to come. It's guaranteed. We live in a cursed environment, and we are cursed ourselves. It is not going to be easy. It's coming. But what if we stood together and we allowed our roots to be intertwined? And you press on me when the wind blows, and I'll press on you when the wind blows, but if all else fails, we'll keep each other up. We'll make sure we stay upright. What happens when we have no support from others? We'll fall. We'll fall. It happens to Christians all the time. Sometimes they have no support because others don't care, and more often than not, I think they have no support because they don't think they need it. How many pastors in these giant congregations are going to fall before we realize that you're never to the place where you don't need to be accountable to people that'll tell you you're crazy when you're crazy? For the record, I'm crazy. But remember to tell me that sometime. Like sequoias, when we stand together, we can support each other. So my request to you is, okay, let's stand together then. We'll all stand together or we'll all fall alone, right? You want to stand together? Let's take a shot. See what happens. I got your back. And if you really know me, you know what that means. And I know you have mine. We say that about each other. We're family here. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. We stand together. Our roots are intertwined. We're a grove of sequoias. We're the change the world's waiting for. We're the laser that's going to poke holes in the darkness. Whatever illustration works for you. We're Lucy. A broken and contrite heart God will bless. So perhaps it's time that we meekly and humbly fell down before God and admitted that we kind of maybe thought we had it all together, but now we realize that we didn't. And because we thought we had it all together, maybe there was a tendency for us to expect others to have it all together, even to the place to where we say, well, you know, if that person could just get their ducks in a row, man, we'd just love to have them in our church. I wish they could kind of change so that we could accept them. That's not how it works. The church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. If we do this right, you have no idea how messy it's going to be. Because everybody that comes in is going to be just as broken and reckless and messed up as we are. Are we ready for that? I don't know that you can be ready for it. But do we want to be? But one way or the other, if all else fails, let's stand together.